At this time, I'd like to call up Mike Seminary, the mayor of Bismarck, to MC for the day. And welcome to the summit. And I know we've got some people who will be coming and going today, so we'll get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry, and welcome to the Transportation and Trade Beyond Borders Summit. Interesting timing. I'm finishing 2 books by Peter Diamandis, one called Abundance and then the other Bold. Those books are technically about the population on the planet 15 years from now, and do we have enough resources to provide for everyone? And it turns out we actually do. In both of those books, they talk about trade and other barriers in transportation. I'm halfway through a book written by Rosabeth Moss Cantor, who is a Harvard professor. The name of the book is Move. It's literally forecasting what transportation, really mobility, challenges we have today, and if we don't address them well, the consequences for that. I found that interesting because as the mayor of the greatest city on the planet, I'm looking at some transportation bottlenecks we have. To that end, I have brought in, during the course of the last 5 months or so, consultants from various parts of the country that also have the ability to bring somewhere between $5 and $6 billion for public-private partnerships. And they're doing this globally, because that's what's happening globally. For me, the most relevant topic when it comes to trade, particularly between our borders from Canada to Mexico, and all points in between, is this. The globe is becoming smaller, faster. There are more people every day with great needs. And it's incumbent upon us to have conversations like this with greater frequency and more of them all over the planet. Because the sooner we can find ways to help people that would prefer to cut our heads off because they are struggling with such great needs in their own country, the better off we're all going to be. It is a very small planet, and I'm very excited about these types of conversations because, to me, I'm in front of leaders, people that want to be part of solutions, that see not only the opportunities for the short term, but ways that we can impact all of us for the long term. And that's really what we're all about when it's about leadership. So I'm excited that we're having this conference. It's, I believe, the second that I'm aware of, anyway. There was one last year, and I'm so excited to be a part of it, and I appreciate the invitation, Larry, and all the team that have put this together. I'm not going to talk anymore about my thoughts about transportation, trade, etc., because there are people that are eminently qualified to do that, and I'm not one of them. I just read stuff and confuse myself. So I'm going to introduce the greatest senator on the planet before the next greatest senator on the planet who happen to be from the greatest state on the planet in the country. That's the state of North Dakota. And I also happen to be fortunate to call him friend. I'm not going to read Senator Hoeven's bio. I knew Senator Hoeven when he was a banker, and he was taking Taekwondo classes, something that I taught for years. And I got to know him as a friend. And then now I know his family. And he is a great leader. And we have 3 of them in Washington that represent not just the state of North Dakota, but collectively all of us. They are all visionaries. They're all people of great passion. Senator Hoeven, before he was a senator, was the governor of this great state, and then he ran the Bank of North Dakota. He knows trade, he knows commerce, he knows transportation, he knows the needs of this state, and he is intuitive, and he surrounds himself with very knowledgeable people that help him make very difficult decisions. And I am so proud to call him not only the senator of North Dakota, but Senator John Hoeven is also a personal friend, and I believe, Marlo, we're going to put the senator up on video, are we not? Are we ready? Do you want me to go on a little bit longer? I could cover my hair care tips. And you know that I've written a book. Frankly, it's Mike's Hair Care Tips. It's a very popular. It's a quick read. It's primarily pictures. While they're queuing that up, one thing about Rosebeth Moss Cantor in the book Move. Interesting timing that we're
today about the importance of trade and transportation for our nation and our neighbors. We appreciate the work of the Central North American Trade Corridor Association in promoting economic growth in North Dakota communities and others along this important corridor. As a member of the Senate, I'm working to create a good business climate in this nation that promotes innovation and ingenuity. We're focused on growing our economy and creating good jobs for our people. And trade is an important part of the mix. We've worked to approve trade agreements with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama to eliminate tariffs and open formerly closed or restricted markets to more of our products. Now we're working to extend trade promotion authority and open more new markets. There is a strong demand globally for many products made right here in North Dakota, especially our ag products. In fact, North Dakota exported $6.8 billion in goods and $995 million in services in 2013. We're also working to build and maintain our infrastructure. That includes roads, bridges, pipelines, and rail. We continue working to pass a long-term transportation bill to provide the certainty states need to make long-term construction plans. I also continue working to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. This is important energy infrastructure for North Dakota and the U.S. and Canada. I appreciate this summit's focus on unmanned systems as well. We've worked hard to build unmanned aerial systems in North Dakota to help realize the enormous potential of this exciting industry. We've been working to build our state into the premier northern hub for UAS operations. We secured Grand Forks as a test site for integrating UAS into the national airspace. And we've established Grand Sky, a UAS technology park on Grand Forks Air Force Base with Northrop Grumman, a leading aerospace company. To ensure that we stay at the forefront of UAS development, I'm sponsoring legislation to support commercial UAS operations. UAS has tremendous potential. Remotely piloted aircraft can improve crop production, provide valuable aid for first responders, and even deliver packages to our doorstep. We need to design safe pathways for the UAS industry to deliver these benefits to consumers. And my legislation through the FAA test sites does just that. These are just a few examples of our work to empower economic innovation and build a good business climate that promotes trade and transportation. I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to build a strong future for our state and our nation. Thank you again for all your hard work. Have a wonderful summit and a great day.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. Next on our agenda is Mr. Michael Flaherty. Michael took up his position in Minneapolis in September of 2011. As Canada's Senior Trade Commissioner, he is responsible for the delivery of the commercial programming of the Consulate General in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. Consulate's commercial program focuses on trade and investment development, as well as science and technology linkages. Please welcome to the summit, to the stage, Mr. Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome to Bismarck.
Yeah, nice to see you again. Thank you very much, folks, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back in Bismarck again. In fact, this venue, and Rod Bachman will know this, that when I first arrived in September of 2011, one of my first trips, 2 weeks after I first got to Minneapolis, was to Bismarck. And this was where the event took place. So it's kind of fitting that I'm actually, 4 years later, heading back to Ottawa. My assignment's done in Minneapolis, so I'll be leaving in 6 weeks. And guess what? This is my last visit out of Minneapolis in the very same place. So kind of a special place for me. It's where I started my assignment here in the Upper Midwest, and where I'm leaving it. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview today about two basic topics. One is Canada-U.S. trade. I'm going to cover the northern end of the Continental Corridor, and then I want to talk a little bit about the Beyond the Border initiative and the importance and the linkage of that to your discussions of a transportation corridor. And I know our friend, the Consul General from Mexico, Alberto, where are you sitting, Alberto? Oh, there he is. He's right over with Rod. He's going to be talking a little bit, obviously, about the Mexican-American trade, but just a couple of points on NAFTA, because I would be remiss if I didn't say a couple of words about NAFTA. NAFTA, of course, was negotiated in 1993. It's the world's largest free trade area, 450 million people, and there's a lot of press, especially in the U.S., about pro and NAFTA, and has NAFTA been a benefit? I can tell you from an economic point of view, when you take a look at the numbers, NAFTA has been an absolute overwhelming success for all three partners. Just consider some of these numbers. Trade in the NAFTA area between 1993 and 2012 quadrupled. It went from $297 billion to $1.6 trillion. Now, when you start throwing around million, billion, trillion, sometimes people get lost. It's a crazy number. But think of it this way: if you spent $1 million every day, it would take you 2,740 years to spend $1 trillion. Okay? 2,740 years. That's a lot. That's a big number, 1.6 trillion. So just a couple of words about NAFTA. And I mean, I'm sure between the two of us, we've got lots of presentations, and I'd be happy to talk about that at length. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about, where do I aim this? Let's see if we can get this going here. Oh, not so far. Well, if anybody's doing this manually, you want to, perfect. Why don't I just do the thumbs up then? Just a little bit about what a consulate does. We have three major, I'm the Senior Trade Commissioner. I head up the trade section, so we promote Canadian products, services, investment. Our political and public affairs folks, they advocate for issues of concern to Canada. Senator Hoeven mentioned a little pipeline issue we've been working on for a few years. I'm sure everybody here is pretty familiar with that. And of course, consular affairs. Sometimes we get these rowdy Canadians that come down for Vikings games, and we gotta, get them out of trouble. Put it that way. So that's our consular affairs section. All right. Now, Canada and the United States are each other's most trading partner. I'll throw you just a few statistics out there. It's about $1.7 billion crosses the border between Canada and the United States every single day. And that is by far the largest two-way trade relationship in the world. It supports over 8 million jobs in the United States, and Canadian companies have about 17,000 locations in the United States, employing over 600,000 Americans. It's interesting. When you take a look, Canada's about a tenth the size of the United States, so a population of about 34 million, about the size of California in terms of a market. So one could say, how could that possibly be the case? I mean, how could Canadians be such voracious consumers of goods that they would consume the largest percentage of American exports? Well, there's a reason behind that, and it involves Mexico as well. The North American, since NAFTA, we have developed an integrated North American economy. And you can see this in terms of the transportation infrastructure, in terms of the integrated supply relationship between companies. I like to say, and this is probably the biggest takeaway if you remember anything I talk about today, we make things together. We make things together. There are component parts, I think specifically of, not too far from here up in Northern Ontario, where Bombardier makes the chassis of their big commuter buses, and then sends them down to 2 facilities in the States. All of the electronic components are made in Mexico. They come up to the United States, final assembly engineering in the US, and then they're traded to Korea, sent to the US, sent to Canada. Perfect illustration. And I have another illustration I'll show you later on that's a little bit more simple, and everybody will recognize, but we make things together. That's probably the biggest distinguishing feature. So I'll breeze by these pretty quickly. Canada is the top export destination for 35 states. And the interesting thing about this slide, you would expect that North Dakota and Minnesota and New York and the border states would be the largest customers, or the best customers. But take a look at down south, Atlanta. When I used to work in Atlanta years ago, and this was 2002, 2004. People would say to me, why does Canada have a consulate down in Atlanta? Why do you promote trade down there? I said, we used to, with Home Depot, their headquarters was in Atlanta. That particular year in 2004, we sold Home Depot about $2.5 billion worth of Canadian softwood lumber. And I had a great stat. I said, if Home Depot was a country, they would have ranked between Switzerland and France as a trading partner with Canada. One company based in Georgia. So it gives you a sense, it's not just the northern tier, it's all through the states. And again, this is the percentage of state exports destined to Canada, and you can see the different range. A lot of them are up over 20, 30% of all of their exports go to Canada. Again, that's part of the fact that we make things together. That's the integrated supply chain. And this is the percentage of state imports sourced from Canada. Again, you see the same kind of pattern, so it's not just a one-way relationship. So remember I told you I was going to tell you a picture that sort of solidified the fact that we make things together? See if you recognize this. Probably everybody's had one of those in the last year, right? Well, take a look at it. Next time you have one of these, I want you to think about the integrated supply chain. The bun is baked in Michigan, and the flour is from Saskatchewan. The beef from cattle was born in Alberta, raised in Nebraska, and processed in Colorado. The bacon were pigs raised in Manitoba and processed in Iowa. The lettuce is from Arizona. The tomatoes are from Ontario. The mushrooms are from British Columbia. The onions from Washington, and the ketchup from Ohio. So I bet you didn't think next time you took a big bite of a hamburger, what you're really looking at was a perfect example of an integrated trade relationship between Canada and the United States. I love that picture because everybody can recognize it. So I'll flip through a couple of these stats. No surprising, Canada is North Dakota's largest trading partner. The stat that I really like is according to the North Dakota Trade Office, you trade to about 147 countries here in North Dakota. Canadian trade is greater than 146 combined. All 146, you took them together, still wouldn't be as much of the trade that happens between this state and Canada. Same is true as South Dakota. You can flip through these. I just put some stats up there. Minnesota, Canada's largest supplier of energy to Minnesota, and you can see that 147,000 jobs in that state depend on U.S.-Canada trade. Same with Iowa. You can break these numbers down any way you want, but when I go to the state of Iowa, and again, people say, oh, you're Canadian, what are you doing in Dubuque? Right? I said, well, you got to realize that Canada trades more with Iowa than we trade with India. Seriously. In 2002, we did more trade with the state of Iowa, and then our country traded with India. Two-way trade. Little companies like John Deere and Rockwell Collins, and different entities like that. And Nebraska, you can go through that one again. So why do export jobs matter? Why does trade matter? Why are we talking about the importance of corridors and trade? Exports make countries, states, cities, and businesses more resilient, more competitive. I have and I'm sure there's lots of examples here in Bismarck. I have one particular one in Minneapolis. You may or may not have heard of the company called Cambria. They do, various countertops for kitchens and whatnot. A pretty successful company. They have a manufacturing operation up in Georgetown, Ontario. When the recession hit and the housing boom, or the housing starts went south in the United States in 2008, they said if it wasn't for our facility in Canada where we didn't have a downturn in the housing market in 2008, so we would have been in serious trouble. The fact that they had an export market, the fact that they had a presence there, that they had diversified, made them more resilient. That's why exports matter. Trade's important. Higher wages. There's been numerous studies to say that companies that export and companies that are international, companies that rely on trade, pay better wages. They enable countries to do what they do best. Let's go back to that simple thing of the hamburger. Well, if you're in Iowa, you process pigs. You don't grow mushrooms, right? They do that in British Columbia, right? You don't grow flour in Ontario, but you do it in Saskatchewan. I mean, a simple example, but it enables communities, states, cities to focus on what they do best. You don't have to do everything. And it prepares companies to export to the rest of the world. So that's why exports matter. Just a few companies that you know very well that have a presence in Canada. I'll flip through some of this because I want you to think, take a look at these logos and think what I talked about before. Think about what I talked about before in terms of making things together. The fact that in many cases these companies have supply and inputs on both sides of the border. So we'll flip through. We can go through that one. So a few South Dakota companies. And Minnesota, unfortunately, we had to take off Target. That was too bad. Iowa companies in Canada. I mentioned, yep, John Deere, Nebraska. Right. And of course, a few Saskatchewan companies. I noticed that STEP was a sponsor for this particular program. So if anybody's here from STEP, colleagues from Saskatchewan, I'll come by and say hi later on. Here's an interesting slide. Just in terms of, I'm starting to move a little bit towards talking about the corridor and transportation here. And I want to leave a few minutes at the end if anybody wants to ask me a question about this or anything else related to Canada-US trade. Many key Canadian production hubs are closer to the US markets than corresponding American centers. It's really interesting that that says 90%, it's more like 85. 85% of all Canadians live within 100 miles of the US border. Within 100 miles of the US border. Canada, the population centers, in fact, are about 3,000 miles long and about 100 miles deep. If you go north of that, there's probably only one major Canadian city that extends more than 100 miles, and that's Edmonton. But most Canadian cities are within 100 miles of the US border. I just slipped this in because I couldn't come to the Energy Center in Bismarck, and I couldn't come to Bismarck and not have a slide about energy. So we have a huge trade in energy. Canada is one of the largest suppliers of energy to the United States. We have a completely integrated infrastructure. Senator Hoeven mentioned a lot of these, or some of these points in his slides. Gas, electricity. I know in Minnesota, about 95% of all the gasoline that's pumped into cars in Minnesota comes, of course, from Canadian crude oil. And I know it's a well-known fact here, and I know the senator makes this point all the time, but the KXL pipeline is not just about Canadian oil. It's about North Dakota oil going to American markets. So it's part of that huge energy integrated relationship. And it's not just about oil, too. It's about all sources of energy. Now, we're going to get more into the transportation, which is what the first part of my talk was kind of the why. Canada-US trade. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of transportation. These are just two slides that talk about the integrated nature of the infrastructure. One is the highway system, and the other is the rail system. We could have a slide up here about oil, electricity. I mean, the point is that the statistic I told you before about the growth in NAFTA between 1993 and 2012, the fundamental underpinning structure of that growth is the infrastructure. It's the rail infrastructure, the highway infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure. All of that supports that trade relationship. And I think, Mr. Mayor, to your point about the book you were talking about, I mean, that if you You can't grow the economic relationship without the resulting infrastructure to support it. It's interesting that on the electricity side, you may or may not have heard, or maybe on the news, but in 2003, do you remember when the lights went out in New York and Boston and Detroit and Cleveland? There was a transformer that blew up in Ohio, and all of the lights went out for about 24, 48 hours. Well, guess where else they went out? Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Windsor. Why? Because we're on the same electricity grid. So everything went out. Anyway, my point in this is that to support this expanding trade relationship, you need to develop in a coordinated way our transportation infrastructure. This is an interesting slide because it talks about the how. You'll notice that Canada's trade with the US, as I said, is the largest in the world. 55% of it went by truck. Another percent went about 25% by rail. I don't have my glasses on, but you can see the statistics there. But overwhelmingly, the mode of transportation, the preferred mode of transportation is through the truck, is by truck. So next, this is just more of a Government of Canada slide talking a little bit about the framework, the policy framework that we use when we look at, we call them lenses, the framework of policy lenses in the development of corridors and gateways. And the Canadian government for years has had an established policy on corridors and gateways. Probably one of the biggest investments we've made recently is on the west coast of the United States, going back 10 years, or west coast of Canada, going back 10 years, when we developed the northern port, as well as the port of Vancouver. But you can see what some of the different imperatives for the three different gateways, our continental gateway, some of the issues we mentioned, you've heard them this morning: congestion, bottlenecks, the need for integrated transportation between Canada and the US, and then how are they interconnected? There's got to be extensive consultations between governments, port authorities, organized labor. From a government perspective, it requires, I guess this is the biggest thing. When we were developing Prince Rupert, which is the northern port I mentioned in British Columbia, there had to be a whole of government approach to this. There could not be the departmental silos at the federal and state level. Everybody had to come together with the goal of developing that deep water port. And they did. They did. So we can move on. This is a slide that I'd like you to, I think has real importance for the folks in this room. This was done by the Conference Board of Canada, and we've kept it updated. It looks kind of strange, but let me explain what this is. Those are the top 10 commercial truck crossings between Canada and the United States. Those concentric circles represent the volume of traffic going through those 10 commercial ports. Now here's an interesting stat though. 55% of everything that the United States sends to Canada in the largest relationship in the world passes through just 10 points of entry. Just 10. So, you know, when you think about how many, that's 83% of truck travel crossing less than 10 of our land ports. I want you to notice where 2 of those land ports are. They're in North Dakota. Notice that how critical a role North Dakota plays for that central corridor. Because other than Detroit and Sault Ste. Marie, or Sarnia, and Vancouver, that's it. Those are the commercial crossings, right in North Dakota. So discussions about border and about infrastructure really matter to North Dakota, really matter to North Dakota. And one final point, you see that huge circle around Detroit? That's the largest commercial crossing, one of the largest commercial crossings in the world. And you may have heard via the news that we've been debating and talking about building a new bridge in Detroit to go along with the Ambassador Bridge for years. Got caught up in all sorts of politics. So finally the Canadian government said, that's it, we'll pay for it. We did. So we essentially cut a check for $500 million to pay for the bridge. Well, that circle tells you why. That's why the Canadian taxpayer is going to spend $500 million on the new bridge. And I guess we got the rights to name it because we just announced 2 days ago, the Prime Minister said the bridge is going to be named the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which is awesome. Just awesome. Couldn't come up with a better name than the between Detroit and Windsor. So a few points about the Canada-US border. I'm just check my time here, and then I'll open it up for a few questions. In 2011, so this sort of where I've been before, I've talked to you about the scope of the Canada-US trade, talked to you about a bit of the importance of infrastructure, a few really key border stats. Now I want to talk to you about a really key initiative that's gone on since 2011, which is the Beyond the Border Initiative. So there's 4 key areas of cooperation. There's the whole notion of addressing threats early, facilitating economic jobs and growth, cross-border law enforcement, and critical infrastructure and cyber security. I think we have both come a long way as countries since 9/11. And I think one of the unfortunate consequences immediately after 9/11 was the whole notion that security trumps trade. And I think we've come to realize that we can do it both. We can enhance trade and we can keep our borders secure. So that's the whole idea behind the Beyond the Border Initiative, is to address both security and trade. Next. So in terms of addressing threats early, you can see we've conducted joint threat assessments, improved information sharing, a common approach to traveler screening, baggage screening, improving information sharing, introduction of entry and exit verification data. Up until recently, we never did a lot of exit and entry verification data. Well, you see it all now if you go through with the Global Traveler Program, the Nexus Program. We've really come a long way. So what are the actual benefits? There's reduced time and cost by screening once, accepting twice, reduced immigration fraud, strengthening strengthening enforcement of immigration law through the exchange of the exit and entry records, and fewer misconnections between Canada and the United States. And then there's, of course, ShipRider, or the law enforcement. One of them is ShipRider, that's the picture I put up there. That's the integrated, with the Canadian-US Coast Guard, the integrated monitoring of our shared waterways. So it's really cool. Every time we have a politician come, we'll put them on one of the ShipRider things up in Duluth and get a few pictures taken. It's a great program. So we're preventing criminals from exploiting our shared waterways through cross-border continuity of law enforcement. We've enhanced joint risk assessment and mitigation threats, and digital infrastructure essential for health, safety, and our way of life. Enhancing communications between national cyber operations and strengthening and institutionalized cooperation to enable rapid joint response. And finally, why we're all here is trade facilitation. And you see that through enhanced truster and traveler programs. Those of you that are familiar with the Nexus program, that's the Trusted Traveler program. We've developed a harmonized approach to screening inbound cargo, reducing red tape for shippers. We've jointly plan and improve infrastructure and technology, and implement pre-clearance and inspection. And, you know, this doesn't sound sexy, but when you consider that the border imposes costs on business and the economy in a whole, we estimate that one study in Canada suggested that 1% of our entire GDP could be realized through efficiencies in border movements. And you remember this slide? We're on the truck side, 55% of all the goods move by truck, and they'll go over 10. I mean, that's a pretty definable program, or a pretty definable problem. You know the mode, you know where it's going, and we know what the issues are. So we're working to address that. And if you've been to certain of, I would point you to Buffalo, Fort Erie, where I used to spend a lot of time when I was stationed in Buffalo. There's just an unbelievable build out on the Fort Erie side of that, and those are one of the big concentric circles for pre-clearance. So the trucks used to ramble over the Peace Bridge, and they'd get stuck, and it'd be trucks all over the back on the bridge. Now they're all assembled on the Canadian side. They're cleared by U.S. Customs, starting the pilot now, but they will be within 6 months. They'll all be cleared on the U.S. side. So by the time they get to Buffalo, they're on the interstate and they're on their way. So big investment in infrastructure. The last thing I'll touch on, there's another side of the Beyond the Border initiative dealing with regulation. And if you think border's boring, boy, regulation is just really stimulating. But having said that, it's really, really important. And I fundamentally believe, as with the hamburger, a picture says 1,000 words. This is a sign that was on a children's play structure on in a border town. It said, "Welcome. This play structure is designed for 2 to 5-year-olds in the United States and 1.5 to 5-year-olds in Canada." Perhaps we develop a little early in Canada. I don't know. But, you know, it's funny, and that's the reason I have it up there. But it speaks to a much, much more important issue, and that's our regulatory systems. It's not that they're not aligned. That's not the issue. Is that they're structured very similarly, very scientific base. In fact, many of the regulators on either side of the border know each other. They go to the same conferences. The regulations get developed, and then somehow the output misses each other. It's like there's not a connection. That's a perfect example. 1.5-year-olds to 5-year-olds. So the whole idea of the regulatory cooperation network is to start the discussion early in the process to ensure at the end of the regulatory process, we don't have that. We have regulations that align with each other. The United States will always have its own regulations. Canada will always have its own regulations. But there's so much similar with respect to process and the science base with which we do it. We really have to work hard at making sure that misalignment doesn't happen. Why with Canada? Talked about it before, our manufacturing sectors. I mean, another perfect example, I love this one. Our Prime Minister uses it all the time. There is a confectioner, a candy maker in New Brunswick, and he makes it's called Gannon Brothers, very famous Canadian company. They ship all over the world. And he has to run 2 lines for red jelly beans. 2 production lines, one for Canada and one for the United States. Why? Well, because there's a dye a particular additive to a dye that is allowed in Canada but isn't allowed in the United States. Or something, I could get them wrong, whatever. But our Prime Minister likes to say, you know, I get a lot of emails on a lot of issues. I haven't had one on red jelly beans. You know, no one's got sick from a red jelly bean. Like, why can't we fix that? But, you know, but when you consider the cost of even that one company to run a second production line, let alone the inventory and the supply chain, that just illustrates the cost that we can get out of the system by working through the regulatory side. So the benefits, obviously, for regulators, for manufacturers, for importers, for everybody. So next. And this is an ongoing process. You can get involved. I mean, it's amazing how over the course of the last 4 years, both governments, and this is the beautiful thing about this Beyond the Border initiative is it's very much a nonpartisan. It really is in everyone's interest to get this right. So we've had tremendous uptake from business, from citizens group to identify issues where we can pursue, especially on the regulation side, because business tends to know that they're dealing with the specific regulations. So with that, I just want to thank you very much again for the invitation. I think I'm on time, pretty much right on time. I don't know whether we have a chance for a question. You can question on any of this or anything else related to.
Good morning.
Morning.
Very stimulating. I think that a lot of people don't realize sometimes, unless they work in the business, that how much it does affect us across the border. Mm-hmm. But something that I was wondering whatever happened to Coots Sweetgrass. Why they were always at one time in the top 10 and now all of a sudden they've disappeared. And I know that a lot of people have not wanted to run the face of the Rockies with semis, for one thing.
Yeah.
But I was surprised that they are not in the top 10.
Well, those are largely truck crossings. I mean, I didn't have International Falls, right? And that's a rail crossing.
Yeah.
So most of that slide, that was done by the Conference Board of Canada. But I thought most appropriate for this particular group, when we're talking about, largely commercial truck corridors, which is where the vast movement of goods come from. But
the other thing is a lot of the trucks, it's like I spoke in Alberta one time where they didn't realize that they thought everything was going to California.
Yeah.
And actually, most of it was going to Chicago, Minneapolis area. The other thing that's highly important that I think people don't probably realize, and we'll hear more about it today, is the fact is the North Gate crossing and what's going to transpire there between oil and also grain that's going to be coming out of North Gate. And that's going to be a huge, huge crossing before it's through.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you followed that very closely or not.
Not a lot. I know that it's pretty safe to say right across the Canada-US border, we've done a tremendous job since, not just beyond the border, but since 9/11, of putting a lot of money and focus on the movement of goods and services, or goods, I should say. I got to tell you one area where we haven't done a very good job, and that's the movement of people in terms of business mobility. And that's something that we really have to take a hard look at when you talk about moving people across the border in the service sector for mobility. Mr. Mayor.
Mike, thank you for your presentation this morning. One of your slides broke out by mode, the transportation percentages. Truck was 55%.
Yep.
So putting that on the shelf and then looking at the portal crossing.
Yep.
Do you have any rough projections about increase of that particular port of entry over the next 10 to 20 years?
I could get that for you. I could probably get that for you. I do on a national side. I know that exports from the United States to Canada in 2004 increased 3%. So it was a 3% increase. I might add that your increase in exports to China were only 1. Increase to Canada is 3. So the volume is actually getting there. But that would be an interesting projection to do for your group here, is to get a sense as to where it's going. I mean, there are certain issues that are out there that could impact it. I mean, one is the ongoing issue with COOL, the country of origin labeling. We talked about the beef and whatnot, and that's something that we just need to. I know I could speak on behalf of my Mexican colleague as well. I mean, that's something that we really need to get fixed. Our view is we would much rather act as a North American economic entity in food production to go collectively take on markets in Brazil and Asia rather than spatting amongst ourselves.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very insightful conversation with us this morning. Given the potential mismatch here and there on the regulatory side, I'm wondering, does a venue exist for particularly our state legislators and the provisional legislators to meet together periodically for purposes of addressing joint concerns, harmonization, that kind of thing?
We do it every year.
I must confess, as I was in Bismarck this winter listening to a few of our legislators in our state opine, they really have to get a hold of the notion that this is a world that's heavily integrated.
In the second week of July,
when we don't understand that.
Well, very apropos. The second week of July, I'm not sure of the dates, right here in Bismarck, it will be the Midwest Legislative Conference. And that is a group of legislators from all of the Midwest U.S. states and the Western Canadian provinces. They cover every year, they get together every summer. Last summer it was in Omaha. This summer it's actually in Bismarck. So they'll be here, they'll probably be right here, as a matter of fact, talking about those, not just regulation, but a whole host of issues. I couldn't agree with you more. That forum is vitally, vitally important. Great. Well, thank you again for the invitation. Appreciate it.
And by the way, Michael's PowerPoint will be available on our website here. So if you want to pull off some of that information, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was a wonderful presentation. Just for your edification, on this side of the border, we believe that there's a significant relationship between ingestion of that red dye, youth, and then dependence on Rogaine later in life. So we just elected not to go there. Our next speaker is the North Dakota Ag Commissioner, Doug Goring, and another friend, I might add. Doug has been a North Dakota Agricultural Commissioner since April 2009. He's a third-generation farmer, and along with his son Dustin, they operate a 2,600-acre no-till farm near Menoken in south-central North Dakota, where they raise corn, soybeans, spring wheat, winter wheat, sunflowers, and canola. Doug is the former president and chairman of the board of Nodak Mutual Insurance and director of the American Agriculture Insurance Company. I won't continue with the bio. I will say this about Doug. I know that since he was elected, the added tasks in his office with regards to the ever-increasing regulatory framework in all things water and agriculture keeps that office and staff busy 24/7, 365. And Commissioner, we greatly appreciate all that you do for us. Please welcome to the podium Commissioner Doug Goring.
Thank you, Mike. Well, good morning. Welcome. I thought about, this last week, I've been working on a lot of regulatory issues and policy issues, and I've been running back and forth across the country and across the state. And as I was doing that, I was thinking about preparing my comments for today. And I could have went off in so many different directions, and I thought, well, there's two things that I can probably touch on that at least encapsulate a bit of where agriculture is in this whole system: trade and technology, because I know that's a bit of what you're talking about. And there's a whole lot of other moving parts to this. But in reality, if you look at just over the last 8 decades, just think about the advancements we've seen in our lives. I mean, refrigeration, electricity almost into every home now. You look at healthcare. Look at our quality of life. How things have helped us become more efficient and more effective as people. So we have more time on our hands. We have more opportunities to do things that we enjoy, things that we can do with our family, our friends, and in many cases, when it comes to our work, look at what else we've done. Look at computers. Look at just since the 60s and 70s, how far we've advanced. It's exciting times. And for agriculture, it's an exciting industry. I've always thought about agriculture as being sexy in itself. I love what we do. I love the fact that we live in an industry. You get up in the morning, you go out, and you work. You plant something, you produce something. Maybe you're a livestock producer. You get to see the fruits of your labor. You have an end, you have a starting, and you have an end point. And it cycles, but at least you get to experience it. Many times in our jobs and our professions, we get to see projects we're working on have a starting and ending point. But in agriculture, we get to do it over and over again. And some would say that's repetitious, it's somewhat boring, but there's new and exciting things every day. And then the advent and the innovation and the technological advances that happen take us into new areas that challenge us, that sometimes stress us, but ultimately in the end, it helps us get to a better place where we can become more advanced, more efficient, and more effective. I want to say a few things about North Dakota agriculture. Some probably know this, some have probably heard me say it before. Some would probably be surprised, but agriculture is It's our leading industry in the state. We're responsible for employing almost 25% of our state's workforce. You think about this at a national level, and this will probably surprise most everybody. There was a map study done in 2000, 2001 by American Farm Bureau. It cited that 19% of the nation's workforce is directly and indirectly employed by agriculture. Think about that impact. And people say, well, how so? Think about all of the inputs, all of the services that go into the farm gate, onto that farm. Whether you're talking about equipment, supplies, parts, you're talking about fertilizer, you're talking about agronomic products, crop protection products. Think about on the farm all the services and goods that are being utilized. You're talking about power for drying, you're talking about the shops that are being built, you're talking about the tools, the equipment that are being serviced in there. And then think about once you leave that farm gate, those products that are leaving, they're being processed, being enhanced, the composites that are being used from agriculture for so many different other things because, again, technology has helped us advance even further so that we're using a lot more biocomposites out there in our society. Think about the restaurants. Think about the hotels and caterers. Think about the brokers, the shipyards. Think about everybody in this entire system that is being supported by agriculture. What a wonderful and exciting story in itself that people tend to forget or not even think about. Agriculture is an industry, it is the only industry in the United States that actually has a positive trade balance. Now we're going to be challenged this year. Value of the dollar is going up. We have a collapsing market. And it is a struggle for producers right now. But it looks overall, when you look outside the state of North Dakota, those that haven't received 7.5 inches in the last 10 days, they're getting a crop in the ground. And it looks good. I think there's something like 85% of the corn in the United States is actually planted. That's far ahead of normal. And we're doing it because, again, technological advances. Look at the equipment that's out there. You see seeders that are 24 rows, 60 feet. Heard of equipment being built these are drills, 120 feet. I haven't seen one yet. And there are a few fields in North Dakota that you could actually pull up and go out there and plant it. Probably not on my farm. You'd hit a few tree rows by the time you turn around. But how amazing that we have made those types of accomplishments and advancements. The other thing about agriculture and its evolution is, I want you to ponder this. At the inception, the beginning of agriculture in this country, there's been one constant, and that's the soil that we derive food from, the soil that grows forages for our livestock. But in grain production, it's been pretty constant. We've had to learn how to manage it a little bit better, do a little bit more with it, and in fact, if you looked at the soil, you could attribute about 75 to 80% of the production coming from that base component. When you advanced all the way into the 50s, you then had a change. We had hybrids come along. We had fertilizer. Now all of a sudden it was because of other things that we're putting into the system that helped with the production. And by the time you got into the 70s, soil only played about 35%. 35 to 40% of the production that existed out there, because we were doing a lot more at that time. Now there is one other factor I didn't mention, but that's a variable all the time, and that's the weather. But removing that out of the whole entire system, What have we done that has advanced agriculture? Well, by the 90s, biotechnology took us to the next level. Now we can attribute, when you look at overall, if you have the soil and you have the ability to put everything in place with the advancements that have been made, the crop protection products, the breeding, the research programs, the ability to look at and address yield, quality, pests and pathogens, the equipment, fertilizer placement, the seed placement, the variable rate technology, we can now attribute to the soil itself 15 to 20%. We have practices and systems in place that have helped us advance and become so much more efficient. Now, barring that, that doesn't mean you can completely get rid of the soil and just grow crops, although some have done it with hydroponics. But it has showed that the advancement has taken us from point A to point B in this day and age. We used to have grain yields in this country back in the 30s and the 40s that were 36 bushel an acre corn yields across the entire nation. Today, the average yield is 167 bushels an acre in the United States. That's pretty amazing. And we've done it because of advancements in technology. We've done it because there's been a hunger, not just a hunger out there in the world for our food and for our products. There's been a hunger out there to become more efficient, more effective, strive to be better. It's amazing. And we've created such wonderful, tremendous opportunities for everybody involved, whether you're a crop consultant, an elevator manager, a maltster. I think there's about 300 jobs that are associated with agribusiness, and you don't even have to be a farmer. My next point about all this is we're in a land where, well, land of plenty. We grow more, we produce more than we can consume or utilize. And that means we have to find a home. We have to find a home for all those products. And consider this, there are some in our society that have chastised agriculture for trying to find a home outside of our borders. But 96% of the world's population lives outside of our borders. 80% of all the buying power in the world is outside of our borders. 92% of all the middle class growth that will exist in the next 3-4 decades will exist outside of our borders. Folks, our business, our market, and our service to our country and to society and to this world is to produce, market, trade, and provide. We are so blessed and so fortunate. We have some people that haven't even left their home state, let alone left the United States and taken a trip across the world. I've been in countries where people are living off from 600 to 1,000 calories a day. We are so blessed and we are so fortunate. Embrace what we have. We have the naysayers. They forgot that we are in a land of opportunity. We have choices. And instead we have people that are ridiculing, scrutinizing, throwing rocks, tossing mud because they don't like some agricultural practice or some system that's in place. Embrace it. Embrace what we have. Biotechnology, technological advances have brought us to a point where we not only have the security in producing an abundance of affordable food for our people in this country, but have the ability to support jobs, economic security. This is a wonderful time It's a wonderful conference to have to talk about what more can be done, what more can happen, to make your voices and your decisions and your innovation and technology known to many others, because there's policymakers out there and there's others that will take it forward. They'll advance the cause and they will help tremendously. I appreciate all that you've done. I appreciate the commitment, the interest, and the investment. I'm honored and I'm proud of everything that all of you have done. I'm proud and honored of the people, the industry that I serve. I respect and cherish and embrace all that farming and ranching contribute to our lives every day. To those farmers that are tenacious and humble. These are men, women that'll sit on a tractor every day, all day long, pull a calf and tend to that newborn calf all night long and get up and do it all over again. And they're so proud and they're so happy to do it. Let's embrace everything that agriculture has to offer, because we're embracing everything that you've had to offer. We utilize it, we adopt it, and we promote it. Again, thank you so very much. I think this is a wonderful conference to have. The conversation needs to start, it needs to happen, and I think we're going to get someplace better with it. Have a great day. God bless. And I hope to see you around the corner. And maybe the next new device and practice will come down the line that we can utilize. Take care.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your time this morning. We'll take a break now.